Imagine stepping back to the early 1970s. It's a time when global intelligence agencies are deep in this really complex game of cat and mouse. We've got these recently declassified secrets, and they paint a picture of, movements being tracked across continents, political activism, revolutionary ambitions, all meticulously watched, but often really shrouded in confusion. It sounds like a spy novel, honestly, but it was absolutely real. Okay, so let's unpack this. Our deep dive today, it's all about getting into two specific uh, recently declassified secret CIA cables from 1973. Our mission really is to pull out the key nuggets of info from these pretty dense real-time documents. You're basically about to get a shortcut to understanding some surprising stuff about American black militants, hijackers, and the intense intelligence efforts to monitor them back then. It's a fascinating and I think often overlooked piece of history.
Absolutely. And these aren't just, dry summaries written years later.
Mm.
The core of what we're digging into today comes straight from these two documents. One secret cable from February 6, 1973, and another from March 14, 1973. Both came out under the JFK Assassination Records Act. What's really striking is how raw they feel. They're like snapshots of intelligence gathering happening right then, full of code names, conflicting reports, urgent requests. It really gives you a feel for the immediate, unpolished nature of intelligence work at the time.
Okay, so let's jump into that first glimpse then, the February 6th cable. You immediately get that sense of, well, maybe chaos is too strong a word, but certainly urgency, like you said, not polished history, just raw observations, immediate concerns, and boom, right away we hit a classic intelligence problem: mistaken identity.
Exactly, yeah. The cable talks about the arrest of a George Lorenzo Matthews. He also used the name George Rich. Tanzanian authorities picked him up in late December 72. And the interesting part is they mistakenly thought he was the hijacker, George Edward Wright.
Okay, and here's where it gets really interesting, like you flagged. The report says Matthews was let go pretty quickly once they figured out he wasn't right. But then, almost in the same breath, there's this other source saying George Edward Wright was actually in Dar es Salaam right when Matthews was arrested. I mean, that's not just a small mix-up, is it? What were the real implications of that kind of confusion so early on?
Oh, it's significant. It wasn't just, a typo. A misidentification like that could seriously misdirect resources, waste valuable time, maybe even cause diplomatic issues. It really highlights that razor-thin margin for error they were working with. It's like a constant fog of war, trying to sort fact from fiction in real time. And the cable then quickly shifts to monitoring specific Black Panther Party members, too. We see reports from a confidential source, codenamed Inbreed. The source mentions BPP members Felix Lindsay O'Neill and William Holder. The belief was they'd visited Geneva sometime before November 1972 using their real names.
And Inbreed apparently had already put travel control measures in place for O'Neill and Holder by that date. How proactive was that for the time? What do travel control measures actually mean here?
It means they were actively trying to track them, possibly restrict their movements. Think of it like putting them on a watch list, eluding border controls, flagging passports. For the early 70s, that was pretty involved, yeah. So there's real concern about their international activities. The cable keeps going, tracing other figures too, which just adds more layers of uncertainty. Another source, Eleni Argot, reports a James Joseph Patterson was seen in France on December 13, 72. And he was apparently with someone named Nathan Burns, who also went by Q.
Right, and Elnergo even suggests this Burns is most probably identical to Nathaniel Jerome Burns. Then another source, a sensitive B. Carroll asset, reports something else. As of late January 73, Pete O'Neill and his wife were apparently living in Dar es Salaam, but with two other BPP members who weren't identified. The cable itself sort of guesses these two might be Burns and maybe a Larry Neal McKay, but then it immediately qualifies it. No positive identification.
That phrase really stands out. How did they function with so much guesswork?
It was this constant juggling act. They had to take these fragments, often from different sources that might even contradict each other, and try to build a picture. That no positive identification is key. It shows they had leads, maybe strong suspicions, but couldn't lock it down. So they're working with probabilities. And what's also fascinating, truly fascinating, is a comment in the cable itself. It suggests that some of above may possibly be a result of alleged efforts O'Neill to spread confusion. Whoa, hold on. So the agency itself was considering the possibility of deliberate disinformation coming from the people they were tracking. That changes things. How would the CIA even try to cut through that kind of deliberate noise back then?
Incredibly tough. It really came down to trying to corroborate information from multiple, ideally independent sources and assessing the reliability of each source over time. That first intel request in this cable kind of sums up the struggle. They're asking the station in Algiers to confirm if Wright and Holder had traveled outside the city and for any other comments. They're trying to get clarity, basically, but they're often swimming in ambiguity.
Yeah, that February 6th snapshot really captures the initial scramble, the confusion. But what happens next? As they start to maybe connect some dots. Let's turn to that March 14th cable because it seems like things get, well, maybe clearer, but also maybe more concerning.
Yes, definitely. This second cable describes a really significant meeting. It happened on March 10th, 1973, in Paris. A man named Henri Curiel, from something called the Apparatus Direction Committee, made some pretty major announcements. And the crucial bit here, he reveals that this apparatus was actively involved in supporting 6 American black militants and hijackers who were then living in Algeria.
That apparatus actively supporting them. Okay, that sounds like a major shift. Finding out about this apparatus, what does that imply about the threat they thought they were facing?
It goes beyond individuals now, right? Absolutely. Discovering the apparatus is huge. It changes the whole picture. These individuals aren't just isolated actors anymore. They're part of a potentially sophisticated, internationally supported network. Suddenly, the challenge isn't just tracking a few people. It's potentially dealing with a whole hidden infrastructure. And Curiel didn't stop there. He stated the group of 6 had actually split up. 3 of them, 2 men and 1 woman, were now in France, and the other 3, again, 2 men, 1 woman, were over in Switzerland. And the cable notes specifically that those in Switzerland were in a very precarious clandestine status and should be removed ASAP.
Precarious clandestine status, what does that really signal in terms of risk? Like they were close to being caught.
It suggests they were operating deep undercover, probably without good papers, maybe without safe houses, really vulnerable to exposure or arrest. That urgency, remove ASAP, implies they were in immediate danger, yeah. But even more significantly, Curiel announced the entire group, all 6, were determined to return clandestinely to U.S. and continue revolutionary activity. And they were apparently convinced they needed political and ideological training before they left Europe.
Whoa. The idea they were planning to get training before returning to the U.S., that sounds like a serious escalation. What would that mean for intelligence agencies, knowing this wasn't just about escaping, but strategic preparation?
It meant they were likely dealing with planned, ideologically motivated operations, not just, spontaneous acts. It paints this vivid picture of long-term goals, a real commitment. That definitely changes how agencies would need to approach tracking and countering them. The cable also gets into more specifics about tracking hijackers thought to be in Algiers.
Right. It says a sensitive source reported in mid-February that hijackers there had asked for titre de voyage travel documents for certain people. And there was also this belief that Eldridge Cleaver had actually already left Algiers earlier that month, in February. And then, like you said, the cable gives this very specific list of hijackers they believed were still in Algiers around mid-February.
Yeah, it's quite a list, with some familiar names and their aliases. You've got William Holder, also known as Lyndon Charles White, and his common-law wife, Catherine Marie Curran. George Brown, who apparently also used Harold Singleton. George Edward Wright, the guy from the mistaken identity case, also known as Larry Darnell Burgess, and his wife, Joyce Tillerson Burgess. And then Melvin McNair and his wife, Jean Carroll Allen McNair.
That's a much more concrete list of targets than just speculation, but I imagine tracking people using aliases, different documents, especially across borders, still incredibly tricky.
Oh, a total nightmare for analysts. And the cable gets into that uncertainty too. It speculates they might have left Algiers using travel documents in their real names. But they might be using other documents, different identities, for residency wherever they ended up. There's even a specific note about the possibility that Holder, who is apparently the group's spokesman and head of the BPP's international section in Algiers, may have remained in Algiers. So, still not totally clear. And the ongoing intelligence needs are really spelled out, too. There's a request to tell liaison partners other agencies, presumably that all or some of these listed people may have left Algiers, and that rumors were putting them in France and Switzerland.
And the reason given was to avoid duplication of information, which, seems like a constant battle in the intelligence world, even when the stakes are this high.
Exactly. Bureaucracy meets espionage. And the final request is pretty blunt. Basically, send any information on the whereabouts hijackers, including activities location. Just find them. It really shows how these investigations are continuous, always evolving, always trying to catch up to the latest move.
So, okay, connecting these two cables now. February and March 73, we see this definite progression, right? The first cable is, like we said, confusion, fragments, mistaken identity. Just weeks later, The second one drops this bombshell about an organized apparatus, clear plans for training, and a return to the U.S. for revolutionary activity.
It's a really striking example of intelligence work in action, I think. That initial fog
Yeah.
starts to clear, maybe just a little, revealing what looks like a much more coordinated transnational threat with clear strategic goals. It shows that shift from just trying to figure out who is this person to understanding this network aimed at carrying out activities back in the U.S. It really was this dynamic global game of cat and mouse.
So we've just walked through this deep dive into these declassified CIA cables from 73. We've uncovered these complex efforts to track American black militants and hijackers across North Africa into Europe. We've seen the real nuts and bolts of intel gathering the mistaken identities, the conflicting reports early on, then the later revelation of this organized apparatus backing revolutionary goals, planning clandestine returns.
Yeah, and it's definitely not just some, dusty historical footnote. It's a genuine window into that intense global landscape of political movements and intelligence operations back in the early 70s. It really highlights the challenges they faced, trying to piece together information that was fragmented and sometimes contradictory in a really high-stakes environment where getting it wrong could have major consequences.
So, thinking about these documents, the way information flowed or sometimes didn't flow or got confused, what other stories, what other layers might still be sitting in archives somewhere, waiting for their own deep dive, maybe even showing us more about how this whole era of intelligence gathering and political activism shaped things for years to come? Makes you wonder, right?